Okay, so we're going to take a few questions, maybe about 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next session. But I see there's one already, so Peter.
I thought those were two really wonderful papers, but as we make the transition from a sort of a biological and a science-oriented assessment of the problem into a moral assessment of the problem, I consider it worth pointing out that Prabhu Pingali's excellent paper was based on charity and love between the people of the world. And actually, with Africa growing from 1 billion, sub-Saharan Africa from 1 billion people today to 2.2 billion people 32 years from now, much more than doubling in a place where hunger is already rampant. And with India, where the government predicts that half of the soil is deteriorating under its present use, and where the population is slated to go from 1.3 billion to 1.7 billion in the same period, I think we get a measure of how very difficult it's going to be to feed those people. Some European nations, like Norway, fed by an excessive oil income the last few decades, and a few others, Canada has been generous far beyond any reasonable expectation. Developed nations of the world have in fact showed little desire to really help, and as nations get more and more crowded, and as we see ignorant, greedy people like we have in control here in the United States now controlling foreign assistance, basically hating all countries in the world and trying to feed our own nationalism, I think you can understand why in this conference we've brought together a collection of morally grounded, morally oriented people who can talk to us about the reasons for doing things and those who can provide the scientific facts. I am personally convinced that only love, charity, and a genuine concern for the planet that takes us beyond our day-to-day needs can possibly save the situation. And I pray that we will find those solutions. And I'm sure that the further papers today will provide some guidance in finding them. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for just a few questions. Thank you.
Again, I'm Jay Fish from University of Missouri, St. Louis. I hear both presentations addressed plants but not soils. And just a question, are we assuming sort of the standard industrial paradigm that soils are plant support where you then put water and nutrients through it? Or what are some of the effects that soil depletion, soil erosion might have on crop yields, and do we need to do something different rather than relying upon our usual annual crops that seem to greatly erode soils?
Well, I think in Dr. Pingali's presentation, he brought up the need for including tree crops and perennial crops into cropping systems. And I think that that's certainly something that has been showed to increase soil health all over the world. And it's another solution that can help bring modern agriculture back into balance. I think we're just beginning to understand soils, the microbial system, the fungal system in soils, and how we can, understand that and use that to improve the health of soils as well.
How do you evaluate and how do we go forward with all the pressure from the large chemical and fertilizing companies that produce seeds that are dependent on fertilizers? How do we ever get away from that with all that industry pressure?
Do you want me? I can start as a resident here in St. Louis. I think that this is a very complex issue with many complex solutions. And what I see are a diversity of researchers and a diversity of academic industry partnerships working together to think about novel directions forward and how not only technologies and agronomic practices, but also practical pathways in business for how that might proceed. So I guess there's not a one simple answer other than to say, I think through partnerships and through collaboration and through a diversity of approaches, we're making progress little by little. I don't think it's an impossibility. Okay, this will have to be our last question. Sorry.
Dr. Ainsworth, you discussed how climate change will lead to increased yields, but also decreased nutritional content. I was wondering, will those two cancel each other out, or do we have hope to increase the nutritional content as well?
I think that actually increasing the nutritional content is low-hanging fruit. As was mentioned in Dr. Pengali's presentation, we've traditionally bred for yield. So nutritional quality has not been a target of breeding systems to date. And I think that there's considerable genetic variation if you look across, whatever crop that you're interested in the nutritional quality of the part that you eat. And I think that understanding the transporters that lead to more iron or zinc content in seeds, understanding the vitamin A concentration in sweet potatoes and other tuber crops, that's ripe for breeding, and we haven't done it before.
So thank you. On that note, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to cut this conversation a little short. But I know Dr. Ainsworth will be here today, and so I would encourage you to approach her with your questions or send follow-up emails. Thank you very much for your attention.